Thank you.
Tonight on Talking Politics, from housing and transportation to literacy and early education, Governor Maura Healey laid out her plans for 2024 in her first State of the Commonwealth speech this week. GBH News State House reporter Katie Lannon will walk us through the key moments in just a few minutes. First, though, the New Hampshire primary is days away, and GBH News' coverage is already underway. Boston Public Radio co-hosts Jim Braude and Marjorie Egan join me now from beautiful Manchester, New Hampshire, with what they've been seeing and hearing from the campaigns as they head into Election Day. Good to see you both. Thank you for taking the time to be here. Marjorie,
you too, Adam. Thanks for having us.
When we were up there 4 years ago, it was a wide-open Democratic primary starring our Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren. There was tons of energy, if I recall correctly. What's the mood like, and what's the feel like in the DoubleTree Hotel in the center of town right now?
And that's well, as even the manager of the DoubleTree Hotel said, it's not like it was, as the manager of the DoubleTree told us this morning, it wasn't the same as it was 4 years ago. I mean, the Democrats aren't really here, right? There's no, and it's basically down to Trump and Nikki Haley at this point. So it's not as crowded. You see far fewer national outlets up here, a lot of local outlets, New England outlets, but you don't see the big national people like you did 4 years ago.
Yeah, but I'm not sure it's just because there's not a race on the Democratic side. There is a Biden write-in campaign against two candidates. It's also all these polls, Adam, you've seen, the vast majority of Americans, and that includes New Hampshireites, are not crazy about the two likely choices, Biden, another rematch, Biden and Trump. We interviewed reporters today and just average people who said, I'm voting for Trump, but I'm not crazy about him. I'm voting for Haley, I'm not crazy about it. They're on and on like that. So I think it's the absence of exciting challenges that have tamped down the excitement a bit.
Yeah. I mean, we had a lot of people who texted us that said that they had unenrolled from their party so they could be independents in New Hampshire, so they could vote for Nikki Haley to prevent a Trump win. We got quite a few texts.
That was about the only enthusiasm. That's a very good point, by the way. Yeah.
About that. People really that texted us were nervous about Trump.
In a year where there are not a ton of subplots that seem to be exciting, that's a pretty interesting one. So, as you two know, the Democratic Party tried to give the first-in-the-nation primary to South Carolina this year. Joe Biden wanted to do that. New Hampshire ignored them, said, we've got this codified in state law, we're going to go first like we always do. And now Biden, as you mentioned, is ignoring New Hampshire. He's not on the ballot. He's not campaigning there. Has anyone been telling you that they are worried about the future of the New Hampshire primary as an institution and that this might be the beginning of the end for it?
Well, not to be morbid here, beginning of the end wise, but one of our listeners said, we should all remember that if Trump wins, that will be the last, this will be the last primary ever in the United States. So that was a little heartening.
Yeah, also, we spoke to the head of the NAACP for Manchester, and we've actually, James McKim, we've had an argument with him both this time and last time about whether or not this is the appropriate first state. And while he defends New Hampshire, he actually thinks a regional primary, including New Hampshire, would be a far better idea, and so do I. So beyond the Trump line of Marjorie's a minute ago, this could be it. Obviously, it's it for the Democrats, but we should be careful. While the Democrats are saying, we're not doing this thing, there is an aggressive campaign led by some people like Maura Healey, Kim Driscoll, Michelle Wu, to have a write-in for Joe Biden on Tuesday.
And there's also the write-in, the ceasefire write-in, which several people have mentioned to us, too.
Oh, yeah, Marjorie, can you explain that, actually? Because I've heard about that as well, but some of our viewers won't be familiar with it. What is this ceasefire write-in idea?
Well, essentially, it's about the Hamas, Gaza-Israel situation where people are very upset about, I think we're up to 24,000 people in Gaza, mostly women and children, are dead. And these people are very upset about this. Some of them are mad at President Biden about not pushing Netanyahu more toward the ceasefire. And they're writing in ceasefire as a way to draw attention to the president about their regret about his position at this moment.
I wanted to ask each of you, and Jim, you anticipated me going in this direction just a minute ago. I wanted to ask each of you, whether you think it does make sense. You're in the belly of the beast right now. Does it make sense for New Hampshire to continue having the first primary in the country, whatever the Democrats push for, whatever they want to happen? Or is it time, you've covered a few of these, I've covered a few of these, is it time to look to a different framework that might represent the country a little more effectively? Jim, you said you like the idea of the Super Tuesday.
By the way,
You said you like the idea of the Super Tuesday. Or forgive me, I'll try again.
Yeah, but until that happens, regional primary, or at least a combination of places for a primary. We've been coming here almost 25 years, every 4 years.
Yeah.
And I think our position is the same. We're hypocrites. We love coming to New Hampshire for the political fun of the thing. It, of course, should not be the first primary state. In terms of diversity, people of color, far lower than the national average. The biggest city we're sitting in right now, 115,000 people. Cambridge has 115,000 people. So I think if it was on the merits, which it is not, well, I guess it was for the Democratic Party. If it's on the merits, this isn't a representative state. And the last thing, Adam, you know, everybody says they love the one-on-one politicking. And by the way, while Trump isn't doing it, Haley's doing it to a degree, and DeSantis did to a degree before he left the state yesterday, I think, for good. That's not how you govern a country. So I love the idea that you get to shake the hand of every candidate. People don't lead our country by living room conversations. And so I think for a ton of reasons, this is not the right choice for the first primary.
Well, I think you forgot the line about how the candidates would come up here and do everything but change the kitty litter in people's homes, and sometimes they were changing the kitty litter, as you point out. That's gone. But Adam, I'm going to be hypocritical too. I mean, look at we're up here in New Hampshire. We have this great opportunity to talk to different people from New Hampshire, to talk to different politicians. Tonight we're going to go to a Nikki Haley rally. Tomorrow night we're going to go to a Trump rally. And we hope to see some more of those T-shirts with the bosomy women on the front that are voting for Donald Trump. That's always a big. The vendors, you know, are always great to interview. The merchandise. So it's a great opportunity for, you know, for Boston and for Massachusetts and New England, obviously, to have this primary here.
It is, but Jim, your point about how you don't govern the country by going around talking individually to people, I think that is an important point to highlight. And I heard the interview you did with, was it James Merrill, the Republican operative, who was talking about Mitt Romney comforting a distraught waitress at the Red Arrow Diner when she was expressing dismay about health care and her ability to afford it. It's great to see moments like that, but they're not what you do as president, and I got to think that it's at least possible to have them in other states as well, in other places where people are campaigning. I know prediction is a tricky business, but I would love if either of you are willing to hazard a guess, or both of you would be the ideal, about what's going to happen on Tuesday and whether anything is going to happen that's going to fundamentally change the arc of the presidential race. What do you think?
How about you, Marjorie?
Well, I'm going to steal some lines from Jennifer Horn, who used to be the chair of the GOP up here in New Hampshire. She's no longer even a Republican because she's very upset about Donald Trump. But her prediction was this, that if Nikki Haley wins, or Nikki Haley even comes close, that Donald Trump will say she cheated, and it will be the beginning of his claiming everyone is cheated in any race across the country where he does not become the winner.
Well, I should say, Adam, I should preface this by saying that 4 years ago, when Joe Biden came in, whatever he came in New Hampshire, 5th or something, I predicted Nostradamus-like dead in the water. He is finished. He should withdraw today. I don't know what happened to that guy, but I don't think it was the correct.
Remember, we saw Joe Biden and his wife Jill at the desk where you check in.
Of course we do, yeah.
And we felt so sorry.
Felt sorry for him, literally.
Felt so sorry for Joe and Jill. Little did we know.
I have to say, I actually believe that Nikki Haley's going to pull this thing out. And the reason I do is the New Hampshire voters are a contrarian lot. I love contrarianism. And I think after Trump winning by a landslide, an historic landslide in the Iowa caucuses, and the conventional wisdom to which I subscribe being that if Trump wins the first caucus and the first primary, it is over, I think there's going to be a mini revolt by New Hampshire Republicans and undeclared voters switching. So I'm predicting a narrow Nikki Haley on Tuesday night.
I love that take, because what better way to flex at a moment when your influence is being called into question than by sending the most dramatic message that you can, right? Jim Braude, Marjorie Egan, thank you both.
Thank you kindly,
enjoy your
Adam.
time up there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will. Thanks.
Next up, as we just mentioned, this is not your run-of-the-mill New Hampshire primary. Ex-President Donald Trump is seen for months to be headed for a victory on the Republican side despite his re-election loss in 2020. And on the other side of the aisle, incumbent President Joe Biden opted out of the New Hampshire race altogether over a dispute with Granite State Democrats over whether the first-in-the-nation primary should be held there or somewhere else. But will a late surge from Nikki Haley cast doubt on Trump's inevitability? And will a campaign pushing Democrats to write Biden's name in on the ballot save him from an embarrassingly weak finish? To break it all down, I'm joined by Andrew Smith, director of the University of New Hampshire Survey Center, and Boston Globe political reporter Emma Platoff. Thank you both for being here. I know you're extremely busy. Emma, let me start with you. When people think of the New Hampshire primary, they think of a scene, or at least I do, where you've got 3 to 5 interested citizens sitting in a diner asking question after question of a presidential candidate who takes, all their inquiries and responds thoughtfully and takes all the time that they could possibly want to fill them in on where he or she stands. But you've reported that that's not really the way it is working in this election cycle. What changed?
The big difference is you have a frontrunner in Donald Trump who seems not very interested in embracing that sort of political lore of the New Hampshire primary. He's not in diners, he's not doing town halls, he's not taking questions directly from voters, he's not really shaking hands or kissing babies. He's holding these large rallies, drawing bigger crowds than the other candidates and certainly reaching a very devoted group of supporters, but not engaging in that sort of one-on-one way that has become the story of the New Hampshire primary.
So did the other candidates follow his lead and shift away from that sort of thing, or did they do it as he went instead to bigger, more spectacular events?
I think the answer is yes and no. Overall, there were fewer retail politics events just over this cycle. That said, Nikki Haley, in the final stretch here as she tries to close the gap with Donald Trump, has been ramping up her schedule, doing a lot of sort of small-scale meet and greets today. One has to wonder if part of that might be the influence of Governor Chris Sununu here, who's sort of a master of the New Hampshire retail political scene. But for months, really, we did not see the number of diner stops and fish fries that you might typically expect in a cycle.
Andrew Smith, you did a poll just over a week ago saying that Haley is in striking distance, or was at the time, of Donald Trump, and that she might benefit and get even closer if Chris Christie dropped out of the race, as he has. What's your sense of how close she is to Donald Trump right now?
Well, it would have been a whole lot better for Nikki Haley had Vivek Ramaswamy stayed in after Iowa, because yes, she got a lot of support from Christie voters who want anybody other than Donald Trump. But the problem is that both for Ramaswamy and for Ron DeSantis voters, their second choice is Donald Trump. So when Ramaswamy dropped out, any advantage that she got from Christie dropping out has really been equaled by Trump. And so I don't think she's closed the gap. I think it'll be very difficult for her to close the gap, in part because Trump is beating her by almost 2-1 among registered Republicans. And no candidate has won the New Hampshire primary without winning the plurality of their party's registered voters. We have a myth about the independent voters here, but the independent voters have never determined who wins the New Hampshire primary.
Is it possible that this cycle could be the exception? Because as I understand it from your polling in large part, Haley is attracting massive support from independents who are planning to vote in the Republican primary this year, right?
It's mathematically possible, but she would have to win upwards of 75% of the undeclared votes in order to overcome Trump's lead among registered Republicans. A very hard task, and she's relying a lot on people who are really Democrats. They may be registered and declared what we unfortunately call independents, but they're really Democrats. It's hard enough to get people to come out and vote in their own party's primary, let alone go out and vote in the opposite party's primary. It'd be like asking a Red Sox fan to go down to the to Yankee Stadium and cheer for the Yankees because they want them to beat the other team that they're playing so they can get to the playoffs. It's possible, it just doesn't happen very often. So Haley's got a much more difficult task ahead of her. also in part because the undeclared or independent voters don't turn out at the same rates as do registered voters. So if you had to bet on somebody, you'd want to bet on your registered voters rather than on the undeclareds or independents.
I would think that her challenge there is made tougher by the fact that at least some of the messaging that she's been engaging in over the last couple of weeks might not be particularly appealing to left-leaning independents. I want to just play a quick bite of her on Fox News back on Tuesday, in which she said, and this got a lot of attention, that we are not a racist country in the United States. Let's take a look.
We're not a racist country, Brian. We've never been a racist country. Our goal is to make sure that today is better than yesterday. Are we perfect? No. But our goal is to always make sure we try and be more perfect every day that we can.
Emma Platoff, I'm wondering, are there other aspects of this particular unusual primary that have stood out to you as you've been reporting up there? For example, the enthusiasm or lack of enthusiasm around this push to get people to write in Joe Biden so he doesn't have an embarrassingly weak finish. Or perhaps the way that Haley is making her pitch to those same unenrolled voters that we've been talking about. Anything stand out that you've seen that you want to highlight?
Those are both really interesting points. I mean, the big story Tuesday, right, will be the results of the primary, and the big story Wednesday will be what that means for the general election. We've been talking for months with voters and in our newsroom about the enthusiasm gap here. You know, it's hard to get voters out to write in a name. It's just a taller ask than pushing a button that's already on the ballot. And we know just from polls and from dozens of conversations I've had with voters that so few people in this country are excited about the prospect of a Trump-Biden rematch this fall. So the implications of that, I think, will be clear from Tuesday's results, and we'll have more to say after that.
I want to bring up, since we're talking about that writing campaign, Andrew, you polled on that recently, too. In your January 9th poll, Democrats, 69% said that they were planning to back Joe Biden. 7% said they were planning to back Dean Phillips, and 6% said they were looking at Marianne Williamson. It sounds to me like there's a little tension between the lack of enthusiasm that Emma is describing among people for Biden, writing in Biden, and that finding of yours. But maybe I'm not thinking about it the right way. Were you surprised that 69% of people were planning to support Biden, even though he tried to undercut the primary itself?
Not really, because I think that national party politics will trump anything that goes on with the primary among voters when it comes to November. Yeah, Democrats aren't real happy about the DNC and Biden bypassing New Hampshire as the first primary, but they also recognize that they don't want Donald Trump as the president, and they don't see another Democrat that they can do better than Biden. When we ask in polls, do they want Biden as a president? Likely Democratic primary voters wish they had somebody else, but they don't know who that person is. So they're basically trudging to the polls to put Biden's name there so as not to have Biden embarrassed and be a further weakened candidate going into November. I think that the campaign has been very nervous about this. The writing campaign isn't a new thing. It was really being planned as far back as last spring, and there's been quite a bit of effort putting into it because there are a lot of people that frankly that are working on the Biden campaign or have worked for Biden recently that were going clean for Gene in 1968. And they remembered the last time that we had a write-in campaign in New Hampshire with the sitting president, and that was with LBJ in 68. And his narrow win over Gene McCarthy led him to drop out of the race. Democrats really don't want to see that happen. They don't have an alternative to Biden, even though they don't really like him necessarily being at the top of the ticket.
It is remarkable to think that there are people who are working on the ground who actually have a memory of the Gene McCarthy situation. That's really kind of mind-boggling. Andrew Smith, Emma Platoff, thank you for being here to talk this stuff through, and enjoy the next few days up there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Finally, tonight, in her first State of the Commonwealth speech this week, Maura Healey laid out a series of ambitious calls to tackle some of the state's biggest issues.
Costs are too high for housing and transportation. Our schools are the best, but not for every student. Congested roads and slow trains steal our time and our joy. It's frustrating. We have to act, and we have to act now.
GBH News State House reporter Katie Lannon joins me to unpack all of it. Katie, good to see you. Thanks for being here. So in these speeches, politicians tend to start off talking about what went well over the past year, things that they achieved or that they achieved in collaboration with others. What did Governor Healey highlight as she took the victory lap portion of her speech?
Quite a few things, actually. You know, she talked up the tax break package that she signed last year, which fulfilled a campaign promise for her, and several pieces of major policy, including making school meals permanently free. Another thing she had talked about on the campaign, which was making community college free for students age 25 and older. Those are all things that were done with the legislature, and some of it was unilateral too. Just her as governor, like pardoning several people in her first year, an unusual move for a new governor, but something she says shows her commitment to justice.
So there are some things that have been done. What about things where she might have said that Massachusetts is not quite where it needs to be, but is on the right track under her watch?
Yeah, I think you heard a little bit of that in that clip from her speech. Is some of those items are education, early education in particular, the cost families are bearing for childcare, the transportation in all elements, whether it's public transit, whether it's the traffic on the roads, and really the housing costs, which I don't need to say anything about. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows it's expensive to live here. Those are things she talked about making moves on. But, if you listen back to her inaugural address from a year ago, she was bringing up those same problems. So no matter how far we've come in the past year, there's still, you feel the pinch, even though you might get a expanded child tax credit, more money that way, you're still paying a ton of money for childcare if you're a parent.
I want to ask you if she maybe pointed the finger of blame a little bit more at the Baker administration than she has in the past, specifically when it comes to public transit. Let's take a look and a listen to what she had to say about the state of the T when she took over and now.
When we took office, was badly underfunded, very poorly managed, and woefully understaffed. 1,100 vacancies alone a year ago. It's no surprise the trains weren't running on time. So we pledged to hire 1,000 new workers at the T.
Katie, to me, that doesn't sound like the way, at least in her first year in office, Governor Healey tended to talk about things that happened in the Baker administration. Am I attaching too much importance to this, or was that significant?
I don't know. I think it is those are some sharp criticisms, right? But, we also heard her when the track issues with the Green Line extension came to light recently under her team. It was revealed that, folks under the Baker administration had known about that. She knocked the prior administration, never Charlie Baker by name, but the prior administration for showing poor judgment over that. And, I think it's worth noting, too, that when Charlie Baker was in charge of the T, he was often pointing his finger backwards as well, saying, he was trying to clean up after decades of underinvestment. So I think when it comes to the T, we do see people in government looking backwards because it has been such a long-term problem.
That's a really good point. And I got to wonder, just as an aside, if that Green Line, that series of Green Line revelations, the Green Line setback, was maybe a turning point for the way she thought about the Baker administration's stewardship of the T. In the piece that you wrote for our website, you stressed that Governor Healey, even though she just made some mid-year budget cuts, has a whole bunch of big spending plans, or plans that would involve substantial spending, that she would like to see legislators make a reality. What are some of those?
Yeah, she really was talking again on that education front. She wants to invest in student literacy, in expanding, the financial help that families get paying for childcare. She's talking about investing in K-12 schools, in roads, in bridges, in rural areas. She talked about doubling operating support for the MBTA and, making low-income fares permanent, or fares for low-income T-riders permanently reduced, which is something that, that costs money to do. So there were a lot of places that she's talking about spending money. Some of that will be through the budget. Some of it will be borrowing when it comes to those big bond bills where she wants to invest in climate technology and the life sciences. Those are things we won't see, an immediate dollar for dollar price tag in the state budget on.
We should probably hear from the governor herself. I want to just give people a sense of how she talked about this money that would need to be spent to make these things a reality and how specific or vague she was when she was addressing that question. So let's take a look at how she did it.
We need to be smart with how we spend our money, your money. That's what we're going to do. The good news is that our economy and our fiscal health are strong.
Katie, correct me if I'm wrong, but after unexpectedly low tax receipts a couple months ago, I think back in December, isn't that pretty much what the governor said about how she would avoid making mid-year budget cuts, that we need to be smart, be effective stewards of Massachusetts taxpayers' money, and then a month later, all of a sudden, we were making budget cuts she'd said that we weren't going to make. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I think you are. What really changed for her after she had said, we don't need cuts, we can manage through this, is another month of below target revenue collections came in. It's been several months now of sluggish tax growth, or sluggish growth in tax collections, and they don't think they can make that up. They lowered the revenue estimate for this year by $1 billion. So Governor Healey, at that point, it was when her team said, changed their minds essentially and realized they would have to make cuts because the situation wasn't improving.
So in speeches like this, and you'll have about 40 seconds to answer this, there are also things that you would expect to be addressed that are either omitted or maybe downplayed. Did anything stand out on that front for you in the governor's state of the Commonwealth?
Yeah, we didn't hear specifically what her plan will be going forward for dealing with a really big source of state spending, which is the influx of migrants that have strained the shelter system. That's still a big question mark, and it's something that she's still, in that speech, focusing on working with the federal government and asking for more help for them. We don't know if or what she'll look to change here in Massachusetts or there in Massachusetts and some in New Hampshire.
All right, Katie Landon, thank you for talking with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's it for tonight, but do come back next week and let us know what you think. The email's talkingpolitics@wgbh.org. The website's gbhnews.org/talkingpolitics. And while you're at it, please sign up for our politics newsletter. For now, thanks for watching and good night.
We're leaving.